What we're going to take a look at is an overview of period 4 with the purpose of basically just looking at all of the themes, in particular 4.2 about social structure and 4.3, how do those relate? So to quickly review, and I'm going to move quickly, we've looked at all this in class in one way or another. To quickly review, we looked at how, in terms of a pattern, Japan kind of explains a lot of the pattern of relationships between state building and social structure. In this time period, we see a lot of traditional state building, which requires change in social structure. So, for example, in Japan, as the shoguns sought to gain control, after a warring period in which they're fighting against one another, they finally gain control. They have to establish ways of maintaining and establishing power. This requires, of course, that they not just use new methods because they have to legitimize themselves. So they go back to old ways. However, they also have to make new changes because they're creating a new kind of power. So while they claim that it's old, while they're establishing stronger, more powerful empires during this period, you see a lot of changes happening socially because of that. In Japan, you see some anti-Christian laws, a return to Neo-Confucianism, kind of drawing upon that Chinese element, and isolationism, which goes along with those anti-Christian laws, where they both kick out any sort of European, keep very minimal trade from happening. Much of this following after they've lost in the silver trade between Spain and China. They also have to change the power of the elite. So you see this in two ways. The daimyo had always had the money, and so they actually had a lot of power over the shoguns, even though the shoguns had the military historically. In the Tokugawa shogunate, however, the shoguns are smart because what they do is they require the daimyos to get permission for everything they want to build, as well as have alternate attendance every other year at court. This is great for the shoguns because that enables the daimyo then to more focus on kind of competition between themselves and showing off in terms of their money. Then, in addition, the shoguns start paying the samurai directly so that the samurai don't have a direct loyalty connection to the daimyo. So they are changing. Notice how they're changing social structure. They're changing the shogun, daimyo, samurai by making the samurai connected directly to the shogun, making the daimyo directly connected to the shogun as well, and thereby, in this social change, actually establishing their power in new ways. By requiring isolation and limiting trade, merchants are on the outskirts. However, you do see a rise of a merchant class and more money. That's also a pattern you see around the globe during this time, and actually helping governments, because as trade does prosper, even when they're not particularly happy about it, that enables them to make more money and taxes. From all those methods of legitimization, we look that usually they actually bring about problems themselves that challenge state building. In the case of Japan, you see that in the form of revolts, both peasant and samurai revolts, where they would join together. An example of this is the Shimabara Rebellion, which we talked about is when one of the daimyo rebels, is connected to Christianity, tries to protect some Christians, and ends up getting beheaded in the process. This is in the 1640s. All right, so there's the specific to Japan, but there's the pattern of state building and social structure, and that's what we're going to see throughout. And at least my argument to you is this time period is marked by order, trying to establish strength, great power in empires, but that requires social change. So even while they're trying to be somewhat traditional, they are still requiring and maintaining, while they're trying to be traditional, they're still causing change in other areas. Okay, so let's look at the maritime empires and how that works. So we see two kinds of empires during this time. You see maritime, which means by sea, where they're not going to be all connected, and then you see a land-based empire more in the Middle East. Maritime empires are mostly from Europe. Here you see in the light blue pictured the French Empire, and in the the light blue is earlier French Empire, and then the dark blue is the French Empire moving into the 1800s. You can kind of ignore that. They're using, during this time, predominantly the ships, new techniques, new travel methods. All of this use of trade is actually supporting empire and state building. And what we see is Europe develops kind of two kinds of methods in developing their states and building their states. You see in the Far East, because they're unable because Europe is unable to actually find at first something to trade with China and Japan that they actually want, they kind of just become the in-between man in these trade post empires. They also help deal with a significant problem of pirates, which we'll look at in a second. In the Western Hemisphere in America, they more established colonies, more based on fishing settlements, etc. We saw this in 4.1, but I'm kind of reviewing. I want you to see this. This is still in terms of building a state. And so you see the British, the French in North America, and then the Spanish and Portuguese in South America building these colonies. Eventually, and in part, these colonies take off because of still the connection to China. It's all about coming back to China. So eventually, because China needs more silver, Europe is able to get a shoe in to trading with China because of silver. We've talked about that. And you can see the arrows there developing as silver coming from the Americas, being taken across the Pacific by Spain. So it's actually building up Spanish empire, though it's across the Pacific and between America and Asia. And then they're able to trade via Manila into China. That's the silver, this distribution of silver, building the Spanish empire. Furthermore, during this time, a certain kind of new development happens with piracy. And we'll talk about that more later, but pirates are an example of how states are challenged even as they're developing. The fact that there's so much shipping, the fact that there's a maritime empire is actually challenged then by these pirates they develop. Okay? In America, so as Spain develops in America, we start to see two labor systems forming. The first one is the encomienda, mita, hacienda, different systems that enslave Native Americans. Most of these are in terms of kind of a paternal view of protecting these Native Americans, teaching them Christianity, or even just being a good government to them in the terms of mita. But what they establish is a new type of social structure which legitimizes their state building. And we see new elite forming, which you can see in this pyramid up on the screen, where the Creoles are European descent, but they were born in America. And they're kind of a new elite developing where they're native to America. They view themselves as Americans, but they're European descent. What does that look like? And they grow in power. And they actually challenge and will even further in the 1800s challenge the power of the old elite from Europe, the Peninsulares. Furthermore, we see how Spain uses ethnic divisions to legitimize why they're exploiting labor. And they use terms such as the mestizos, mulattoes, slaves to explain and legitimize why they're causing these people to work for them. Right? They also use something called the casta paintings. It's a way of legitimizing their social structure. So they paint these exquisite artwork in order to legitimize and to explain the social structure and the different divisions. Well, here's if you're married to this person, this is who you are, and this is where you fit in the social structure. All of this leads, in fact, to a major population decline. You can see this kind of visualized in this graph. By 1630, the Native American population has, because of disease, as well as many of the deaths in conquest, declined so rapidly that the Spanish don't have the labor that they need in order to keep up that silver trade with with China. Spain is trading silver with China. They can't keep that up. And so they ask and they start a new system of slavery from Africa. This system of slavery is called chattel slavery. We've looked at that. It's basically where people are viewed as property. There are no rights. There is no kind of paternal feeling there. It's just an economic opportunity for them. This new system actually affects multiple regions. We saw in the Columbian Exchange how this exchanges goods, it exchanges diseases, it exchanges cultural ideas. Religion spreads to the Americas. You see Protestantism and Catholicism developing. You see new kinds of religion developing in the Caribbean, where you've got voodoo and other religions like that. And then you've got things coming over from the Americas like cash crops and improved nutritional foods that enable the population growth in both Africa and Europe to grow exponentially.